authentic, creative storytellers that I know. And I think it's really important when you have a personal brand to know what your story is and how to tell it. And that's something that she does and she helps people with. So I hope that you guys take a lot from what she has to say. I hope that you all get the opportunity to work with her because it'll really change your business and confidence in your own life. Jilliane, thank you so much for being here and spending this time with us. Like, I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you. It would be really nice to hear like your story. And when you were younger, what were some of the influences in your life that helped shape you to who you are right now?
When I was young, I grew up in an environment where I guess I lacked confidence. I didn't think I had a lot to say. And some of that is because I didn't see people like me reflected in the world around me. I grew up in a culture where women were systematically excluded from leadership positions. I know a lot of us were in a world like that in one way or another, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that meant that as a young person, I didn't see a lot of opportunities for myself. As a matter of fact, when I was graduating from high school, I had no plans to pursue post-secondary. To me, that seemed like a waste of time and money because I had been told very clearly that my path ahead was to not pursue a profession or a career, but to get married and have a family. And that was the option open to me. So I wasn't planning to pursue post-secondary. I was scared to try and get a job because I didn't think I had any skills. Now, when my friends and I graduated from high school, we decided to celebrate by going on a road trip. My dad loaned us his 1993 Pontiac Grand Am. Nice. And I was very lucky to have this opportunity. So we loaded up the car, packed it with a tent and all our gear, and we just hit the Trans-Canada Highway to travel across Canada. And we had the most wonderful trip. We stopped whenever we wanted to stop. We did whatever we wanted to do. And when we got to Windsor, Ontario, my brother was living there. We stopped to visit him and he took us to a festival.
Okay.
And I remember walking into this big auditorium. I didn't really know what the festival was even about. And we sat down and I saw a tall woman with dark hair, dressed in red, come on stage. I looked at her and she started to speak. And it was like her voice filled the whole space and her person expanded when she started to speak. She was a storyteller. She told us a story. I sat there and listened. I was just in awe. I was in awe of her poise and her authority, and her story was incredible. The whole room we were just all sitting on the edges of our seats, listening to her every word. And I was absolutely gripped. And at the end, I knew that I needed whatever it was that she had. That was the first time I'd seen a woman on stage sharing her story. I came home from that trip and the first thing I did was sign up to take speech arts and drama lessons. I was determined to become a storyteller. And ever since that moment, I've either been studying to become a storyteller, sharing stories, working as a storyteller, or helping other people to tell their stories. It's really just become the fabric of who I am.
Yes.
I guess what happened was I didn't see possibility for myself. I didn't know how to express myself. I saw someone like me share their story and I said, I want that. I've pursued it ever since, and that has created like a full shift in me. That seeing that gave me the space in which to expand myself and my abilities.
Love it. And I think that's so powerful. And I think I'm hoping that's what we're doing here is that people hear a story about someone that they're like, oh, you were just like me, or you had similar struggles like me, and they get inspired to step out. And so what were some of the things that were resistance for you? And like you shared about your childhood, and what did that look like? Like, what was the resistance for you stepping out?
In my childhood, there were systematic barriers in place that would not allow me to assume leadership positions or to really exercise power in the culture in which I existed, because women were systematically excluded from leadership positions in the world that I grew up in. So just as an example, I taught Sunday school and I was a really good Sunday school teacher.
Yeah.
So there, that is one exception. Like I had a position of authority there teaching Sunday school.
Yeah.
Now there were 2 Sunday school teacher tracks in the church I grew up in. One was volunteer and one was paid. And like I said, I loved teaching Sunday school. I was good at it. People used to line up outside of the room to come to my class. Yeah. And I was approaching graduation from university and I thought, I love this. I'm good at it. Maybe this is what I could do for a career. So one day after my lesson, I went to the institute teacher's office, like the head Sunday school teacher's office. And I said, Brother Hill, I love teaching Sunday school. I'm good at it. What would it take for me to do this professionally? And he looked at me and he said, oh, Jilliane, you can't teach Sunday school professionally. Why, Brother Hill? Because you're a woman.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of us in different ways face these systematic barriers, things that are really out of our control, that shut doors and limit opportunities. And I faced a lot of that. I worked to punch my way through that, just as a lot of us do. And the real problem though comes in when those systematic barriers like seep in underneath your skin and into your heart and break down your sense of self or your sense of confidence and make you become quieter so that you are no longer heard. And that is what I want to help people overcome through finding their story and expressing their story.
Love that. And that is like such a picture of what happens to us. And even as a mom, sometimes I look at my kids and I think of times when they're like screaming or doing something. I'm like, oh, that's too loud. And I've been really challenging myself to be like, that's them expressing who they are right now. And I think we do it without even realizing it. And then, like you say, there's structures that hold us back. And there's so many things that layer on top of each other. Whereas a lot of times people don't find that voice in that story until they're older, because it takes that many years to unlearn all the things that were like piled on top of them. So I think what would be cool is if you could go back and if you could say, talk to Jilliane when she was like 10 or 9, what would you tell her? What would you say that you would do differently?
Yeah, I think more than anything, so many of us receive messages from the world around us that say you can't, or this isn't an option for you. So I have 4 brothers.
Okay. Oh,
yeah. And my brothers were all just assigned leadership positions, just given these leadership positions purely, and nothing against my brothers. My brothers are wonderful humans who I love, but they were given these leadership positions that I did not even have an option of considering. I'll never forget. I did a master's degree in library and information studies.
of course you did.
And the first assignment I received in my master's degree was to write a paper on social responsibility and intellectual freedom. Okay. And as I was writing that paper, I was 28 at the time, Naomi, 28. Yeah. And writing that paper, for the first time, I realized that I had been censored, that information had been excluded from my purview, and I had simply gone through my life in this bubble of controlled information. And that limited my curiosity. It put a cap on the questions I asked. And if I could say anything to 10-year-old Jilliane, it would be ask questions, be curious, look for new ideas, look for new information. And in a way, when we tell our stories, we challenge ideas and notions, and we give other people access to a different worldview that they might not otherwise have access to or consider. And that's one of the most powerful things we can do is share our story so other people learn new things, build empathy, understand a different worldview.
Love that. That's so huge. Is just sometimes people be like, I don't really have a story, or what I went through isn't that important. And it's, we all are so unique and we all have a different view and different things that we went through that have shaped us to be who we are, and little things that we can share that will help someone else. And so whether people decide to be these massive business people, or they are at home being the amazing moms or dads that they are, whatever their journey looks like, there's a space for stories. What you do is so incredible. And I think the work that you do is so needed and so important. I wanted to talk a little bit about like working corporate jobs and working for you. You worked for people, worked at the library, and then you took this leap. And so I'd just love to hear, what was it that shifted you from being like, okay, no, I can't do this, I need to take this leap? And how did you overcome the barriers that you thought, were in your way?
Yeah. Like I said, I am a librarian by trade. That's the
Yeah.
profession. That's my profession. And I worked for 13 years in different types of libraries, public libraries, fundraising. And then the last job I ever had was in healthcare. I managed libraries within the province of Alberta in the area of knowledge management. And this was like the cream of the crop job. I was being paid more money than I ever had been. I had a health spending allowance and a pension and all the perks, all the bells and whistles, and a great team. When I was hired for the job, I communicated very clearly to my team that I'm a storyteller, and these are the ways I practice storytelling. And it was a very logical fit because storytelling is a knowledge management strategy.
Yeah.
Now, in my first month working in the job, I was given the responsibility of leading a team meeting with everyone from across the whole department. You're the new person. You show off all that you are in this meeting.
Right.
And so I put an agenda together, and I had to get the agenda approved because it was my first month. And so I went before my director and I said, I'd love to run a meeting where I talk about the concept of storytelling and the values of storytelling as a skill. And she said, that's a little odd. I better take that to the other directors. So she took my agenda to the other directors. Mm-hmm. And then a week later called me up and said, oh, Jilliane, we've decided that learning about storytelling isn't the right thing for the department right now. And in that moment, I realized that if I was going to continue in this job, I would need to keep this part of myself and set it off to one side. And when I showed up to work, I would have to show up as this very in the box person. Yeah. And I was new in the role, so I stayed. But by the time that I was approaching the 2-year mark, I was no longer healthy because it was so challenging for me to not be able to fully express myself every day from 9 to 5. So I had to leave. I think that's one of the wonderful things about being for yourself and having a personal brand is your personal brand is an expression of you. It's a curated expression of you, but at its core, it is you.
Yeah.
So I get to show up as myself every day.
Amazing.
Amazing is right.
Right?
Absolutely amazing. Yeah.
And even when you're in that journey of developing something, you had to create a blueprint. No one else is you, and no one else is doing what you're doing. And so that's a journey, but when it's you and it's your voice, it's like you put in the work because it's what you love, which I think a lot of people in a job can feel like they're not living that. I know you had side hustles, and how important are those, you think, for people to have?
Oh, it was huge for me. Run Calgary Story Slam. It's an open mic storytelling event in the city that we live in. I've been doing that for 8 years now. And I've also been teaching speech arts and drama at Mount Royal University for 8 years. And those two side hustles, they ran concurrently with my professional career. And it was a way for me not only to build my skills and explore different ways of expressing and practicing storytelling. But it was also a way for me to stay sane.
Yeah. Yeah.
While I box myself up for the professional job every day, I get to really be me and express myself in my side hustles.
Totally. I
Yeah.
think that's so important. Sometimes those side hustles, all of a sudden you're like, no, this is it. Like,
Yeah.
that's how people figure it out. I think there's going to be a lot of people on here that are like, I don't know my purpose. I don't know
Yeah.
what I'm called to do. I don't know how to tell my story. And it's those little things that layer on top of each other that
Mhm.
eventually you're like, oh, this is what I'm meant to do. And
Mhm.
so I don't know if you have anything to offer, like for people that are, okay, now they're just sitting there and they're saying, okay, I know there's things in me. And like, how do I face the adversity or the people telling me you can't do that? That's not who you are. Like stepping out of the grain. What would you say to someone who's listening? That's what do I do?
Yeah, you talked, I think you used the phrase common threads, Naomi, and those common threads can bring a lot of insight. And that really is a lot of the work that I do in storytelling. When you examine your stories, you find those common threads, and those common threads can be skills, values, passions, transformative experiences. Like for me, when I look back on that road trip across Canada, it wasn't until I did that when I was 18. It wasn't until I was 30 that I looked at that story and thought, oh, that moment, that road trip put my life on a different trajectory.
Yeah.
And when we look back at our stories and examine them for common threads, we find so much insight about ourselves and who we are. And that insight can help you springboard into a new direction, or it can simply help you express yourself better to support the work that you're doing right now.
Love that. And I don't know how many times I hear people sit and say, I don't like to speak. I don't like to share. I'm afraid. It makes me uncomfortable. Yet everyone has a story and everyone has a message. So I think it's really cool what you do. And I think if anybody is listening that is, I don't know how to tell my story, they need someone like you in their corner to help them. And I think part of our fear sometimes is just not knowing how to articulate ourselves and not knowing, are people going to perceive it well? And what you do is you bridge this gap between this fear into, okay, no, I have something that's foundational that I can stand on to then get me to where I want to be. So I don't know if you want to talk about that with what you do, coaching and things like that.
Yes. So telling stories, I see for someone developing a personal brand, there are two beautiful benefits to sharing your story. There's more. I could go on and on about it, but let's focus in on two.
Yeah.
One, when we share our stories and learn to express our stories, we are able to step into a bigger version of ourselves. It's an incredibly confidence building activity. And that the confidence comes for two reasons. One, because you're literally building skills. Like when you tell your story, you are learning to express yourself in an articulate way, and you're taking that leap, taking that risk to step onto a stage and be heard. And that helps you to build your confidence because you're receiving validation and you're also proving to yourself, yes, I can. Not only that, there's a process of preparation beforehand that teaches you things. So you get better, like you build skills doing that.
Yeah.
The other side of it is when we're able to tell our story, you don't ever have to worry when someone says, so tell me what you do. Tell me about the impact you have. Or when you're in a sales conversation with someone and they said, why? Why? Or when someone says, come onto this podcast interview with me. I've got 3 stories in my back pocket. Or when you're invited to speak at a conference, I'll frame my talk around a story and that will make me so much more engaging. There are so many ways that story serve you when it comes to communicating. And we all have to communicate all the time. So when you know your story, you're ready.
Yeah. And it would help even for a job interview, anything that you need to
100%.
basically sell yourself or to explain who you are.
Yeah.
That's where stories come in. Even just on social media, I think you could attest, you need to know what your story is so that you can create that social media presence as well. Would you say?
Oh, 100%. Showing up consistently on social media is one of the biggest challenges personal brands and solopreneurs face,
Yeah.
because we have to put ourselves out there every time we put a post up. And that's not only is it content creation, but it's like a risk every time. And that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about crafting your personal brand and your brand story and your core collection of stories is that then you have a solid foundation from which to create. It's painting what you want people to see.
I love that.
When we show up on social media, we feel like we have to get everything just perfect and capture exactly what we see. Crafting your story is a way of giving yourself permission to pick and choose the right message to help people understand your message. So going through that conscious curation is so supportive and foundational.
Being able to have a story allows you to still be authentic, but to still have that like sense of this is where I'm going and this is where, and I think that's huge because I think that holds people back a lot from sharing their story, is that perfectionism and that need to like make sure, okay, I want to make sure my points are heard. And it's beautiful in a story because it's still authentic.
When you're clear on your core story collection, you can then springboard creatively from that. Yeah.
And that's perfect because I think people would start with something that's solid, but like you said, you springboard. And all of a sudden you're more confident to talk about this, and it would just grow, I think, from there.
Exactly.
It's all about confidence, and you get that by doing it. So that's amazing. So for those of you who are here, we're so happy that you're here. And I hope that you really got that heart of just knowing your story, knowing your voice, connecting that with your brand internally and externally. And for those of you who want to keep some of this stuff, like, you can get these recordings. I hope that you do, and you listen to them over and you allow that to sink in and shift your perspectives. I know that Jilliane has some great bonuses for those of you that are gonna step into that space. Thank you guys for being here. Jilliane, where can people find you?
Yeah, so follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn at Jilliane Yawney. And Naomi talked about, I'm going to link to a workbook that you can download for free that will help you craft your core 7 stories for business. So things like your origin story, your values, your vision for the future. So check that out. It will be incredibly helpful to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and your voice and your stories.
Thank you. This was wonderful.